Welcome to Meet Your Legislators. I'm Mark Hill, your moderator for our program. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment and thank Vincennes University for their commitment to this program. They are a valuable partner in our community. Joining us today for our program is State Senator Eric Bassler from District 39. Senator Bassler is from Washington. His district includes all of Knox, Davies, Greene, Martin, and portions of Sullivan and Owen counties. As always, Senator Bassler, welcome to our show. It's good to see you again. I know that we're near the end of the long session in the legislature, so can you kind of tell us the time frame that you guys are working with currently?
Yeah, we'll do a little civics lesson to begin with here.
Right.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I always enjoy being on your program, and usually we do it earlier in the session, so I guess in some ways we have more knowns today than maybe we have when we've done these in previous years. So, but kind of where we are in the process right now, on Monday, it's for the Senate side, it's referred to as a second reading deadline. So if you don't call down your bill on Monday, then it's going to be dead for the session. And then Tuesday's third reading deadline. So a bill has to be read across the Senate floor 3 times. So that's the third reading deadline. So again, if that doesn't get called down third reading on Tuesday, then those bills will not move forward this legislative session. They could always be filed for next year or future years. And then once we get through this process, so say on Tuesday we will be finished with third reading deadlines. We will then know what is passed the Senate. And again, keep in mind, we're dealing with the House bills now. So they came over at midterm. And so we will know which bills pass through the Senate and which don't. The ones that don't are obviously dead. The ones that do pass through, if no changes have been made on the Senate side, then they would go on to the governor to be signed. If the Senate has made some changes in the process of having committee hearings and so forth in those House bills, then we will need to go back through what's called the reconciliation process. What did the bill look like when it passed the House? What does it now look like now that it passed the Senate? And the House and the Senate have to reconcile the differences in those bills. And then once they're reconciled, then it has to go back to get approved in the House again, get approved in the Senate. That's a quick process. Once the reconciliation takes place, it's pretty quick to then go back. It's almost kind of a done, the process is essentially done other than just the formalities of going back to the House to be passed and back to the Senate to be passed and then on to the governor. So that's where we are. We're required to be finished by April 29th. We'll probably be finished, probably be next Thursday, which I believe is April 24th, maybe next Friday, so maybe April 25th. So we'll be done a few days earlier than what we're required to be done. So it's coming to a close pretty quickly.
So about 2.5 to 3 weeks process, I guess.
Probably 2 weeks either from yesterday or 2 weeks from today. So yeah.
And then you're not anticipating it being extended for any particular reason at this point?
No, there was some discussion early on, especially on a couple of the more important bills that if the House and the Senate couldn't get lined up with a governor, then maybe there would be possible vetoes, and then you may have to come back for a special session. But I think that discussion, that rumor, that scuttlebutt has all kind of gone away.
So for our audience here, I'm well familiar with a number of the committees and subcommittees that you work on, but you might just briefly describe your areas that you're responsible for in the Senate.
Sure, just to kind of give you a feel, I've been on Appropriations Committee for a number of years, and that's the one that kind of shepherds the budget, the state budget through the process. Related to the Appropriations Committee, I'm also on the K-12 funding subcommittee. And then I'm also on Environmental Affairs, and then I'm on Rules. Rules doesn't really come into play till right towards the end of the session. That's just a matter of almost more of a formality than anything, just to be sure if there's any question about some of the bills that whether we properly followed the rules or not, then we will have that committee hearings. And then finally, I'm on the Ethics Committee. So it kind of gives you a feel for the different things I'm involved with.
So, and you've been how long at the Senate now?
Yeah, this is my 11th session.
11th session.
Yeah, believe it or not. Yeah, so I'm in my third term. But yeah, it's hard to believe that this is the 11th session I've been participating in.
Right.
The years do go by.
And then your partner from our area that I've interviewed equally as
Right.
often as you, Mark Mesmer, has moved on to Congress now. And have you kept in touch with him?
We have, yeah. We've
Okay.
run into each other a few times, and we still kind of text back and forth.
Okay.
And it sounds like, again, that's a big transition,
Yeah.
going from Indianapolis to Washington, D.C.
Right.
But I think it seems like he's settled in well there.
Good.
I always felt that he was a very good legislator. He was very good at kind of digging into the minutia of some very complicated bills.
Right.
Quite often when we had very complicated bills, he'd be the one that would kind of shepherd them through the process. Maybe his engineering background makes him good at detail work.
Probably so.
But I think he's done a good job for us in Washington, D.C. I think he'll continue to do a good job.
Good. So the budget bill, which I guess is Senate Bill 1, is coming to a vote here soon. And one of the big issues that the governor wanted to prioritize was to develop a plan to reduce property tax. So if you could kind of comment on what the status of that is, and then also I have some questions about how that impacts us locally.
Sure. So I guess just a little bit of clarity. So the two big bills, if you will, one would be Senate Bill 1, and that deals with a lot of things related to property taxes.
Right.
You might see it notated as SB 1.
Right.
And then the other kind of big bill is House Bill 1001, and that's the budget bill. And so, although they're separate bills, obviously there's a lot of relationship between them, because when you start doing things with property taxes, that has an impact on revenue,
Right.
and therefore expenditures. But those taxes are paid through local taxpayers. So you think about your homeowner, you pay property taxes on your home every 6 months.
Right.
Those dollars do not go to fund the state government.
Right.
They go to fund cities and towns and counties and schools and so forth,
Right.
libraries.
Right.
And then the 1001, House Bill 1001, is the actual overall budget.
Okay.
And that just yesterday passed out of the Appropriations Committee, as it had been modified quite a bit from when it came over from the House. So there will be some final discussions on what that ultimately is going to look like. And it's this coming week, I believe it is, we'll get some final revenue estimates for the next 2 years. So depending upon what those are, and I'll be pleasantly surprised if they're real positive. I mean, if they were real positive, that means we would have some additional dollars to allocate.
Right.
I'd be a little bit surprised if it was a real positive report when we get those numbers. So those are the two main bills. Senate Bill 1, property tax issues, and then House Bill 1001 is the budget. So
I know with being on the local Board of Works here for the city of Vincennes that in speaking with the mayor earlier this week, I mean, he wanted to express to the legislators his concerns about the impact of the lowering property taxes and how those costs, in a sense, will be passed on to cities and counties, and as you mentioned, schools and libraries. So have you heard from a number of local city officials? I'm sure you have.
we have, yeah, we have. We've heard from mayors, we've heard from county councils and city council members and so forth. Also schools, and it's still kind of evolving, but I think it's getting close to the finish line, the Senate Bill 1, and there, like everything in life, there are pros and cons, right? Good things and maybe not so good things about Senate Bill 1. A couple things to kind of look at from a 30,000-foot view just for a second is we've heard from predominantly homeowners about their concern about increasing property taxes on their personal residence.
Right.
And I don't doubt that that's a legitimate concern. The thing that does give me a little bit of pause, though, so for example, if you every 6 months had to write a check to the federal government for your income taxes and then to the state government, my guess is that would be more on your mind than if it's just taken out of your paycheck every 2 weeks, right?
Right.
And so to a certain extent, I think when people write that check every 6 months, it gets a little bit frustrating when they see it going up quite a bit. So I definitely think there's an issue there. The thing we have to be careful of, though, is it's very easy to say, boy, I want to cut this tax, or I want to cut that tax, or get rid of this tax, or get rid of that tax. But because there's a knock-on effect to that, isn't there? So the question then becomes, okay, if we're going to get rid of a tax, no matter what the tax is, one of two things. What is going to be the impact on where those dollars were previously spent, in this case local units of government, or what is the replacement revenue source? And so one thing that I guess I'm still a little bit disappointed about when it comes to Senate Bill 1 in its current form is initially when the Senate session started, or when the legislative session started, we wanted to deal with property tax issues from the perspective of the homeowner. Weren't so concerned about businesses, somewhat concerned about farmland because it has gone up a lot lately. We weren't so concerned about what's called business personal property tax. So you think about businesses and equipment. So the tax that businesses pay, business personal property tax you pay on your machinery, in my wife's case, on her ice cream making machines and so forth. Okay, that wasn't really on the table in the beginning of the session, but it somehow got on the table in the process. And so we aren't eliminating entirely business personal property tax, but for the most part we are. So the reason I kind of hedged my bets there, I hesitated what to say. It's going to be increased to the point of $1 million and then $2 million. We're talking about just the very largest corporations in Indiana. We're talking about big steel mills up in Northwest Indiana. We're talking about companies like Eli Lilly and so forth. So the big corporations will still be paying business personal property tax. Smaller corporations, mom and pop organizations, that will phase out over a number of years. It's all fine and good. Ultimately, I do think that makes sense from a long-term perspective. I just didn't anticipate it being in this bill because we were, again, focusing on homeowners. And those are dollars that are going to go away from locals over a period of time. So then the locals are going to have to figure it out, aren't they? Either what are they going to cut? Are they going to do less road funding? Are they going to do less public safety issues? Are they going to, have fewer dollars to take care of their parks, for example? Now, there is a mechanism in place that will allow counties and then cities and towns above 3,500 to pass what's called LIT, local income tax. But I also want to be very frank and upfront about that. Even though we give the locals the capacity to do that, even if all of the locals, the cities and the towns and counties and so forth, passed it up to the maximum, there would still be a discrepancy between lost revenue from property taxes and increased revenue from the LIT. And so, and another thing to keep in mind, the only entities that have LIT capacity or that will have LIT capacities, if this passes, are counties, cities, and towns, and then cities and towns above 3,500. So the big one that's kind of missing there is schools. They don't have the ability to pass a LIT, local income tax. And so that gives me some pause because we'll talk about this probably a little bit later. I'm heavily involved with school funding, and the school funding side of the budget is pretty tight this year. So that makes it difficult if the K-12 funding is tight and the schools are going to see a decrease in their property tax revenue. That's a tough combination. So we'll continue to try to work through this and try to have a kind of a reasoned solution to address these issues. But they are complicated, and they're we do need to tighten our belts. We need to tighten our budgets, probably at all levels of government. But we just need to do it in a prudent manner.
And of course, I think that most, certainly from my own perspective, there's the budgets within cities, for example, are pretty lean, so there's not a lot of, unnecessary services or unnecessary funding. So let's move on to education funding. In that mix, several issues, there's always some controversy about charter schools and how they fit into the mix of schools that are funded. And then I've also read about some efforts at deregulation in the Department of Education. So if you would want to comment on either of those.
Sure, be happy to. I almost need a whiteboard to talk about some of this and draw out some pictures, but let's talk about the easement first. When I joined the legislature 11 years ago, I thought we could micromanage our way to improving education, K-12 education. And I affectionately tell my family and friends I'm a recovering micromanager. Every once in a while I still slip back into it.
Right.
And so for 11 years, especially the first number of years that I was in the legislature, we tried to do a lot of things to improve K-12 education. Again, a good, noble thing to do,
Right.
but difficult to do from the state level.
Right.
We really need to see improvement in education happen at the local levels. I mean, they're the ones that are more intimately involved with their school corporations. They're the school board members that are members of those communities,
Right.
those school corporations, the areas of those school corporations. And we're trying to now move towards a deregulation. And it's, in some ways, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards.
Okay.
And there's several things that we're trying to take off the local schools' plates. But yet at the same time, we're then requiring more things. So we're going to continue, I'm going to continue to try and nudge towards fewer and fewer regulations and let schools try to figure out how best to educate their children, okay?
Yeah.
Now, the more complicated issue, and this is where I'd probably need a whiteboard, is to talk about school funding,
Right.
okay? And so when the bill, when House Bill 1001, the budget bill, came over from the House to the Senate side, they had their ideas about what they wanted to happen with K-12 funding. And then we've kind of tweaked that a little bit. So
Okay.
some changes we've made. Now again, these are not final. This
Right.
is just what we've said. We still have to negotiate all this out.
Right.
But some things that we changed with respect to, on the Senate side, with respect to K-12 education was, right now we're funding virtual education. So if you think about a child that
Right.
is online school, we're funding that at 85% of what we would fund like a kind of a normal child who's at Vincent's Community Schools, for example, okay? And the House pushed that up to 100% funding, and we've actually taken it back down to 70.
Okay.
Now, when you think about virtual education, I may not know exactly what the percentage is. It may be 70%, it may be 80, it might even be 90%. But I know it's not 100%. Okay, it's bound to be less expensive to educate a child virtually than it is in a brick and mortar school. Okay,
Right.
so we pushed that back down from their 100% down to 70 right now. Okay, another thing that the House did is they expanded what's referred to as the voucher program to universal vouchers, so everybody would qualify. There'd be no income limits and so forth.
Okay.
We've nudged that back to its current status. Okay, so those are some things that saved a few dollars in K-12 funding, and then there's a few other things and so therefore we were able to add more to the foundation. But then we also made a few other changes. So if you think about children with special education needs, okay, they tend to be more expensive to educate than children that don't have special education needs. So what we did so far is we increased their funding by 5%.
Okay.
There's different categories depending upon how severe the needs are for a child with special education needs. The most severe 2 categories, if you will, we've increased 5%, both those categories, both years. So
Okay.
if you will, the first year is 5%. Now this next year is that 5% plus another 5%.
5%, okay.
So that we've pushed those numbers up. And then finally, we're continuing to see a significant demand for, I don't think this is the official phrase anymore, but I still refer to students as English language learners.
Okay.
So you think about children of immigrants who may come here that don't speak English. So we've done a very similar thing. Well, we did the exact same thing there. Similar situation. There's 2 categories when it comes to English language learners.
Okay.
Some that really don't speak English at all, and some that can sort of speak English, if
Right.
you will. These aren't the official terms, but
Sure.
you get what I mean.
Sure.
We've increased those 5%, both categories, each of the 2 years. So,
Okay.
so we pushed up those areas of funding. Looked like, I think we've added let's say about $840 million to K-12 funding.
Okay.
Which that's reasonable. It hasn't been as much this year as we have maybe in past budgets, but that goes back to the fact that the budget's tight this year.
Right.
All in, we're probably going to spend about 19, probably around $20 billion over the 2-year biennium on K-12 education.
Okay.
So it's not quite 50% of the budget, but it's probably somewhere between about 45% of the budget
Yeah.
or so is going to go toward K-12 education.
And it's certainly the largest piece of pie compared to other things that the
You bet. Yes, it is.
the
Yeah.
House and
Yeah.
Senate
Medicaid would be number 2, and then
Right.
probably higher ed would be number 3 as far as total gross spending.
So, you mentioned in light of things happening at the federal government, there have been major efforts to scale back in the Department of Education, and there's concerns particularly about special needs children and those kind of efforts. And of course, the dust hasn't settled on that yet, so we don't know really how that's going to impact us. So, one of the questions that we had locally was, had to do with the Dolly Parton Imagination Library, because that program got removed from the budget, and then the governor said that he would task his wife to try to raise funds, in the private sector to see if they could offset that cost. And being involved in early childhood education myself, it seems like that's not a very expensive program. So it's kind of disappointing, I think, to the libraries to see that funding go away.
Sure. No, I think that definitely was, and I don't think it was the governor's budget that eliminated. I think it was the House side that eliminated that, if I recall correctly.
Correct. Yeah.
But to your point, the governor did say that that his wife was going to raise that $5 million to continue to fund that. And again, that's great. That's wonderful. We're glad it's going to happen. In some ways, I would almost rather nonprofit donations go to those kind of projects than say taxpayers' money. Right. But having said that, and that may work for a year or 2 years, or maybe as long as the governor's in office, but then what do we do after that? So we're going to continue to work on that. Okay. Obviously, the younger you start reading the children, the better. And in some respects, let's be honest, it's hard to say no to Dolly Parton, right? Everybody loves Dolly Parton. So.
She raised a lot of eyebrows there when that first happened. So yeah, for sure. So let's talk. One of our loyal viewers wanted to ask a question about the current tariff sort of issues, and I know that doesn't directly affect you as a legislature, but wondering about your thoughts about the reciprocal tariffs and how that's going to impact cost of living, particularly for middle and lower income people in the state.
Yeah, we need to be careful. In some ways, I wish that, as you may know, or as your viewers may know, I'm a financial advisor, and so in some ways, I wish when government was going to take, the federal government was going to take some type of significant action, it's better if they telegraph that out well in advance, because if you telegraph it out, then the stock markets, the bond markets can adjust accordingly, incrementally.
Yeah.
If all of a sudden we announce on day one that we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and the markets didn't know that 10 days ago or 2 weeks ago or a month ago, there's a tendency for them to get real volatile, and we've seen that recently. Okay, and so there's a few things going on here. I understand what tariffs are for and what they're trying to accomplish. They're trying to maybe have trade be more equitable between the various countries in the world. And in some respects, if a European country has tariffs against the United States products, well, then why shouldn't we have some against their products, right? I think probably the ideal place to get to eventually would be where there's no tariffs involved. There's free trade. So hopefully the federal government can continue to work through that process, because trade wars are not good for anybody. Right. I would not be surprised when you start implementing tariffs. That's going to push up prices. If we're implementing or importing this jacket from some European country or South America or what have you, and now all of a sudden there's a 10% tariff on this, or excuse me, a $10 tariff. Well, I've got to pay $10 more for this jacket, right? And so if I have to pay $10 more for this jacket, then I have less money to buy this bottle of water with, or what have you. So
have to make tough decisions.
So it's going to have a tendency to push up inflation if we aren't careful, and also just the unknowns. And people see their 401k down in value. It makes them feel less rich and less wealthy. So maybe they then maybe they eat out less, or they go to Walmart less, or whatever the case would be, or they go to the movie less, or what have you. And all that then has a negative impact on what? Tax revenue. So I guess I would encourage our federal government to try to telegraph these things out in advance so we don't have so much volatility. And I hope that Washington, D.C. eventually comes around, negotiates with our trading partners around the world, and they get it back to a level where there's minimal amount of tariffs, and maybe eventually phase them out entirely at some point.
Yeah. So we have a couple more minutes left before we need to wrap up. So are there bills currently that you've sponsored that you want to draw attention to?
Sure, be happy to talk about that. I'm always amazed at how quickly 30 minutes goes
know,
when we're
right?
talking. So the things I'm most heavily involved with, and I continue to be heavily involved with them, I mentioned the K-12 education.
Right.
And we've got that in a pretty good place. We'll see what we end up kind of working out the differences with the House. So we'll continue to be involved with that. This year, for the first time, I was heavily involved with higher education.
Okay.
And when we look at higher education, those are obviously our 7 public universities, including Vincent's University.
Right.
And we've worked through that process as far as their operations. And then there's something called R&R, which is kind of the fix-up, the rehabilitation and recovery on buildings to keep them in good shape. So
Right.
we're still working out kind of the final details there. We were not able, at least not yet, to, generally speaking, we fund their number 1 capital project for each of the universities. We did not do that yet this year.
Okay.
Now, if the numbers come in great next week, then we might be able to. But boy, again, I wouldn't plan on it.
Right.
If I'm a university right now, I'm thinking it's not going to happen. Having said that, we did give universities an option. And one of the universities, Ball State University, took us up on this. And
Okay.
they said, okay, we would like to have our number 1 capital project. So they're going to get that.
Okay.
But then we reduced their operating line item.
Okay.
So it was, the net effect didn't spend any more money on the universities,
Right.
but it gave them some flexibility in choosing on what they thought was best for the university.
Okay.
So we're still going to probably be working out the details on that over the coming days, but I think we're probably awfully close on that and maybe being finalized there. And then the other thing I'm heavily involved with, it's called the Department of Local Government Finance
Okay.
bill, and it's something I've been carrying for a number of years. And I could get into the details, but you'd be bored to death, and I think your listeners would be too. But you think about anything that happens at the local government level, whether it's cities, towns, counties, it can have to do with innkeeper taxes, it can do food and beverage taxes, it can do with errors that a local auditor made in processing some of his or her records, that we clean up those kind of things.
Okay.
And that gets to be unwieldy. I mean, it's probably up to about a 200-page bill so
Is that
far.
right?
So
Wow.
we're hopefully going to get that done this week. So those will be the main things I'll be focusing on here in the next
Okay.
few weeks. So.
Great. So we're about to end our show. Is there anything else that you'd like to briefly tell us about? I think you kind of did that in this last segment. So.
Sure. No, I just encourage people to reach out and contact me. Probably the best way to reach me is via my cell phone, and
Okay.
probably the best way to use that is to text me.
Okay.
It takes me a while to get around to my voicemail sometimes,
Yeah.
but I get so many. But feel free to text me or call 812-617-4269.
Okay.
And then you can always obviously Google my name, and you can see how to email information to my state Senate office if they wanted to do that also.
Yep, and it's a very user-friendly page. I looked at that
Yeah.
this morning before we got together. So thank you, Senator Bassler. And on behalf of Vincent's PBS and our Meet Your Legislators program, I'm Mark Hill. Thanks for joining us.